In August 2019, this issue of the New York Times Magazine appeared on newsstands that created a sensation, designed to be published on the 400th anniversary of the introduction of the first enslaved Africans to Virginia. That also occurred in 1619. This was a really powerful series of essays that argued that 1619 is the locus of the beginnings of the American experience, sort of kind of the mythic origin point of the country. And there's a series of essays that sort of looked at present day issues and so forth, and tracked them back to 1619. The whole magazine was devoted to this subject. It created a sensation. In fact, that's an understatement, and continues to excite powerful emotions, both positive and critical. And in terms of a case study about the politics of history, and we're looking at colonial slavery, 1619 fits perfectly into colonial slavery. And so let's take a closer look at this, what's called the 1619 Project. Now, the 1619 Project originated as this magazine art issue, was subsequently published, expanded, and published as a book, which was a bestseller. And 2023 was made into a documentary. And this interview concerning the contents of the documentary provides a good overview of what was in the magazine, and gives you a good idea of the thrust of this project and the message that it had.
From the moment we were brought here in bondage in 1619, Black life in this country has been defined by hard work. And our labor has generated success stories that deserve to be celebrated. Commonly, people refer to the 1619 Project as a history, but it's not a history. It really is talking about America today.
The 1619 Project is a 6-part docuseries that explores all aspects of American life through the lens of slavery.
Each episode has its own story arc and has its own particular beat in history.
We were told that by virtue of our bondage, we would never be American. But it was by virtue of our bondage that we became the most American of all. The very first episode is Democracy, and it really talks about how Black Americans has been the primary democratizing force over generations in this country.
I want to be able to look back and say, I did this so that you didn't have to. That's what legacy is all about.
The race episode deals with the idea that race is a construct that was made up to divide the powerful from the powerless.
This is a power hierarchy, whether we're talking about where you live, what kind of job you can have, and just in generally how you're valued in society.
The music episode is about how Black music is in every aspect of American life.
There's a whole cultural experience that is fascinating and foreign to white people. They are drawn to this music.
The capitalism episode looks at the particular brutality of the exploitation of labor.
I'm looking at the names of people and their value in the slave ledgers, and they're being listed literally next to a pig or a cow. It's something I'll never forget.
The episode around fear examines the fear of Black men and how that still plays out today.
Jefferson was always worried about a revolution of the wheel of fortune. That is, we're on top now, but this thing can spin.
The justice episode makes the argument that there is a great moral and financial debt that is owed to Black Americans. You are calling for reparations. What is the total that would be owed?
I've seen estimates as high as $14 trillion.
That's a big number.
Yeah.
It's a big debt, though.
It is a big debt.
I think people are going to be compelled and surprised and hurt, but also come away with a newfound respect for the role that Black Americans have played in this country.
We're still here and we're still fighting. As long as there's life, we're going to have hope.
What if America understood after 400 years that Black people have never been the problem, but the solution?
So now we have an idea of what the thesis of the entire project is about and how it's designed and how it plays out. In 2019, soon after the publication of the magazine issue, Trevor Noah, The Daily Show, interviewed Nicole Hannah-Jones, who was sort of the lead author of the 1619 project, and kind of the inspiration, the person who came up with the idea and drove the train on it. So let's listen to the contents of the interview. It's a favorable interview, as you're going to see, and it'll provide an additional idea of the point of view of the 1619 project.
Welcome to The Daily Show.
Thank you.
And congratulations on creating and working with a group of people on a project that has gone on to become more than just a moment, but rather a rethinking of America's history. Let's start with the why behind this. I mean, history seems like it has been written. So why try and write it again?
Well, history has been written, but it's been written to tell us a certain story. And the 1619 Project is trying to reframe that story. And it's really about the ongoing legacy of slavery. We've been taught that slavery was a long time ago. Get over it, which is something nearly every Black person in this country hears at some point. And the 1619 Project is really saying that slavery was so foundational to America and its institutions that we are still suffering from that legacy now, and it's exploring the many ways that we still are.
It's interesting that you've chosen the year 1619 because many people would say, but this was before America existed. You know, why not start at America's founding and then not include the years before when this was a colony and Virginia and Britain were involved? So why do you choose that point? And why do you argue, more importantly, that on the 14th, you say on the 400th anniversary of this fateful moment, it is finally time to tell our story truthfully?
Yes, so it's funny because this year is also the 400th anniversary of the Mayflower. Yet no one argues that we shouldn't learn about the Mayflower because that predates the United States. We know that that was an important moment. I would argue that the White Lion, which was a ship that arrived a year earlier carrying enslaved Africans, was far more important to the American story than 1620, than the Mayflower. So no, America hadn't yet formed, but Virginia was the first colony. Our institutions would come out of the 13 colonies, our legal system, our cultural system, our political system, and certainly the anti-Black racism that we still struggle with is born at that moment.
When you start off in this magazine, there's a really beautiful passage in the beginning where you talk about your personal journey and how you struggled with your relationship with America as a country. And it's a really beautiful tale you tell about growing up you know, on the land where so many people had died and toiled as enslaved people. You also talk about how your father was a proud American and how you didn't understand how he could be proud to be American when America seemed to be against him in spite of everything that he did.
Yes.
How did you reconcile that, or did working through this project change your view on how to be American or on how not to be American?
Yeah, absolutely. Working on the project changed my perspective on my father. I opened the piece talking about how my dad, who was born in apartheid Mississippi, flew this flag in our front yard on this giant flagpole. And he was one of the only Black people I knew who flew a flag in their yard, and I was deeply embarrassed by that. But as I started researching for this project, and my essay is really about how Black Americans have had this pivotal role of actually turning the United States into a democracy, I got that he understood something that I didn't, that no one has a right to take away our citizenship and our rights to think of ourselves as American, because so much of what Black people have done is what has built this very country that we get to live in today.
And what do you mean specifically when you say that? Because that was an idea that I don't think I had fully thought about before I read this magazine, was the concept that America's foundation was a lie, in that it was a group of promises that weren't fulfilled, you know, to both people of color and to women in many respects. And what you argue in this magazine is that black people basically had the job of making it a truth. What did you mean by that?
Absolutely. So when Thomas Jefferson writes those famous English words, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. He owns 130 human beings at that time, including some of his own family members. And he understands that 1/5 of the population will enjoy none of those rights and liberties. So we are founded on a hypocrisy, on a paradox. But black people read those words and said, oh, we're going to believe that these words are true and apply to us, and fight. Again and again, we see them fighting at the revolution. The first person to die for this country was a black man named Crispus Attucks, who wasn't free. We see that happening with the abolitionist movement, largely led by black Americans. We see that happening at the Civil War with the Reconstruction Amendments. And of course, the Civil Rights Movement, which brings the franchise to large segments of America for the first time.
Right.
So we said we were founded as a democratic republic, but most Americans could not vote at the time of the Constitution. But thanks largely to black resistance and freedom struggles, we are as close to a multiracial democracy as we've ever been.
It's a really beautiful story in that it's told not through the lens of anger, but rather through the lens of collecting stories. You know, it's the facts.
I feel it's a little angry.
A little angry?
It's a little,
oh,
it
doesn't feel like
okay,
anger
good.
so much as it feels like a truth.
Yeah.
You know? What it has sparked, though, is a fight over history and how the history is told.
Yes.
You know, once this magazine came out, there were many historians who you know came after you and said, no, this is incorrect. The primary reason that America sought its independence from Britain was not because they wanted to maintain slavery, it was because of taxation without representation. It wasn't the primary cause. Why do you think there's such a resistance to slavery being one of the primary causes of America breaking away from Britain?
Because we need to believe as a country that our founding was pure. That yes, you know, we had some troubles, including holding 500,000 people in bondage, but that largely we were a nation founded to be exceptional in these majestic ideas, and that our founders, though complicated men, were men who were righteous. But when you argue that our founders were, many of them, very hypocritical, and that you can't just simply overlook the fact that slavery was a motivation in some of the colonies. Yes, taxation was a motivation, but also the ability to keep making a lot of money off of human bondage.
Right.
That is very unsettling, not just to the average American, but to historians who have seen their job as protecting that founding narrative. The difference is, you know, when you're black in this country, you don't have the luxury of pretending that history didn't exist. And what that history has done is really marginalized our story when really the story of black people and slavery is central to the United States.
When you worked through this project, there are new pieces of information you discover. There are stories that you find were never told that need to be told. And I know you can't write about everything, but I was interested in whether or not you would think that other countries who are involved in slavery get off easier than the United States, because the one thing they did differently to America as we know it is that they sort of outsourced slavery. You know, if you think about whether it was the Americas or Spain or many of these other colonial nations, their slaves were in the countries, and then they left those countries and were like, we're done with slavery, but they also don't have to deal with the people they enslaved, whereas America has an interesting relationship where you have to deal with the people because they're still here. So not to feel sorry for America, but do you think there's also a reckoning that should happen in this way in Europe, maybe?
Oh, for sure. All the colonial powers need to have a reckoning, and reckoning also needs to happen on the continent of Africa. But I think the fundamental difference, there's two. Yes, slavery occurred in the bounds of the country that would become America.
Right.
But also of those colonial powers, America's the only country that was founded on the idea of individual rights and liberties.
Interesting.
That was founded on the idea of God-given, inalienable rights. None of those other European, I mean, these were monarchies. They weren't founded on the idea that every person had equal rights, but we were. So that hypocrisy really matters. And of course, I argue that that hypocrisy is why we have struggled so much to get over and address the issue of slavery, because it forces us to acknowledge this lie at our founding.
Before you go, one of the main questions many people may have, and you see this unfortunately all too often, is people saying, why do you have to keep drudging this up? Can't we just move on? It's been 400 years now. Can't we just move on? what do you hope would be sparked by the conversations that come from a magazine that delves into slavery like this? What do you want someone who sits at home and says, they go, Nicole, I'm white and I had nothing to do with this and I don't know what you want me to do. What would you hope people take away?
That's a great question. Let me just say, for the record, nobody wants to get over slavery more than black folks. It's not. It's not to our benefit, right? So the fact that our nation can't get over slavery has not benefited black people for a single day. But that's the problem. We've never dealt with the harm that was done. I'm 43 years old, and my father was born into a Mississippi where black people couldn't vote, black people couldn't use public facilities. That was all perfectly legal. We're not far removed from this past at all. And there's never been any effort to redress that harm. So what I hope that people will take from the magazine, every single story in the magazine starts with America today, and shows how these things about American life that you think are unrelated to slavery actually are. And I hope by confronting that truth, maybe we can finally start to repair the harm that was done, and then finally start to live up to be the country of our ideals.
It's a fantastic job, fantastic magazine. Really wonderful having you on the show. Thank you so much. To learn more about this beautiful, amazing story, go to NewYorkTimes.com/1619. That's NYTimes.com/1619. Nicole Hannah-Jones, everybody.
The pushback with the 1619 project was breathtaking in its scope. There was a lot of praise for the project on the one hand, but there was also a tremendous sense of threat voiced by persons on the right, including Peter W. Wood, who was the president of the National Association of Scholars. And be it remembered, the National Association of Scholars produced the model legislation on which Ohio Senate Bill 83 is closely based. Here is an interview with him critiquing the 1619 project. It's not even 2 minutes in length, but the complete 90-minute interview can be found on the C-SPAN website, and I provided a link in case you would like to have a look at it. As I say, it's a 90-minute investment of time, and I think it probably might be worth the time to check it out and give Wood a full and fair hearing. Let's listen to this 2-minute excerpt.
Nicole Hannah-Jones, this angry woman, found when the post-George Floyd riots broke out in this country that there was a possible connection to her own work. And when Charles Kessler from the Claremont Institute suggested in an op-ed piece that the riots could be called the 1619 riots, Nicole seized on that and said, yes, that's what they are. Others clearly heard her, because as statues began to be toppled in American cities around the country, George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, Frederick Douglass even, they were spray painted 1619. That was the tag that said, this is the 1619 moment. So yes, we are talking about a work of sometimes scholarship, sometimes pseudo-scholarship, sometimes just essayist work that came out in August of 2019. But it moreover became the seed of a movement, and it is a movement that has tremendous destructive energy in it. It certainly played a part in the 2020 elections. Not that I particularly want to talk about that, but I think that given the Times involvement and how Nicole Hannah-Jones positioned herself, it's important to recognize that this is a work of advocacy and a work that was intended to inflame. That it has also become a curriculum is a point to be, I think, quite concerned about. Nicole Hannah-Jones.
The interview with C-SPAN was to allow Wood to talk about his own response to the 1619 project called 1620. And so, of course, he's positioning the origin story of America with the arrival of the the Pilgrims. This was far from the only book to come out to critique the 1619 Project. I'll give you the titles of a couple of other books that came out. The New York Times 1619 Project and the Racialist Falsification of History is the title of one such book. Another one is entitled the 1619 Project, debunking the 1619 Project, exposing the plan to divide America. And it's not in the title, but on the cover is a flag from the American Revolutionary period that has 76 on it prominently. And so implicitly, this person places the origin story in 1776. But notice that they're not that the pushback is not just saying that that she's got it wrong, and the New York Times has got it wrong in terms of the emplacement of the origin story, but that also it's dangerous. It is a conscious attempt to divide the country, and that's an amazing claim, to my mind. And so I was surprised when I discovered that was the basis for some of the criticism. I might have thought that that you could criticize some inaccuracies, and and being thesis driven, I can think of some reasons to kind of go after it as history, and to criticize it, in historical terms. So remember, with history, you can engage with it critically. You can argue with history back and forth, but you're not really dealing with argument in terms of the response to the 1619 project, because it's not really engaging with the 1619 project. It is sort of railing against it, and so what these things can be seen is a reassertion of the dominant public memory that we have of the origin of the United States, which I think was the most of us would position in 1776, although 1620 I think is another good possible candidate. The next thing I want to show you is a short, tremendously emotional video produced by the Heritage Foundation, which is a major conservative think tank based in Washington, D.C. And I was kind of surprised when I saw this one. I wasn't surprised that it criticized the 1619 Project, but I know people at the Heritage Foundation, and I know the work that the Heritage Foundation has produced, and it is a think tank that does advocacy on behalf of, that has a conservative point of view, but sort of the extreme characterization took me aback. But let's have a listen to the perspective offered here.
There are those who claim America's true founding was in the year 1619, when African slaves were forced across the Middle Passage to come to the New World. They claim that America is rooted in oppression and racism. These are the claims of the 1619 Project. But the true founding of America happened in 1776, when a group of rebels fought for independence from the British and built America with one idea in mind: freedom for all. Our founding fathers saw the future, a world without slavery. But America did not start out this way, as some were not free. Sadly for America, some refused to embrace the idea of freedom for all. They thwarted laws prohibiting the importation of slaves, laws intended to end slavery in America once and for all, and would have certainly preserved the barbaric institution of slavery forever. A civil war was declared. Over 300,000 white men fought alongside 36,000 of their black brothers, and all made the ultimate sacrifice, giving their lives to end slavery. Proponents of the 1619 Project refuse to acknowledge this history. After the Civil War, America remained a divided nation, flawed, but now free to all. Reconstruction laid the framework for what many blacks might have considered an unimaginable future, and it began with over 15,000 blacks being elected to office. By the turn of the 20th century, America began to experience an awakening as black culture was sewn in the fabric of the nation. The lines began to blur between black and white. Black culture slowly infused with American culture. Still, the struggle continued. Hate groups like the KKK continued oppressing blacks. Laws were passed to prevent blacks from gaining the true American dream. Undaunted, America marched steadfastly toward its great vision, a vision enshrined in the nation's Constitution.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed.
The dream, mentioned by Reverend King, would eventually be embraced by all. The entire country lauded sports legends like Jesse Owens and Joe Louis to destroy the idea of Hitler's white nationalism. Many other blacks destroyed racist and bigoted stereotypes as black engineers, scientists, doctors, judges, scholars, authors, playwrights, poets, and entertainers became mainstream to the American culture. Why would anyone want to destroy such a legacy? A legacy of overcoming adversity to form one nation under God, one unhyphenated America.
I mean, that's really amazing stuff. So, what I would like for you to do is not take sides. Not say that the 1619 Project has got it right and the critics have got it wrong. And I don't want you to like split the difference either. But I would like for you to look at these two perspectives in a kind of a creative tension with one another, and out of acknowledging that creative tension between the two, and when I say creative tension, I mean using this as an opportunity to create a deeper understanding for yourself. That's the approach that I want you to take in terms of evaluating the 1619 Project and its critics as a case study in the politics of history. And what I would like for you to particularly look at is to go back and look at that 3-minute or so Heritage Foundation video and think carefully about what it's trying to say, because it also acknowledges that America has struggled for a long time with its racial past, and there was hypocrisy, and there was white Americans who wanted to perpetuate slavery, who wanted to continue to keep African Americans down. So the Heritage Foundation acknowledges these kinds of things. The 1619 Project also acknowledges, and yet clearly is attempting to say that their way of looking at it is the proper way of looking at it. And so I would like for you to take a close look at sort of the narrative strategies and the images and so forth that are used in this video to create an interpretation that they claim is a direct refutation of the 1619 Project. And this historical clash has already had very strong political implications. Peter W. Wood asserts that in his interview. The Heritage Foundation would not have produced this video unless it was for a politically driven purpose. That's what the Heritage Foundation does. So this is a historical question that has gotten out into the wider population, and for the claim to be made that exploring this has no place in a college history course, to me, it's just bonkers. Now, the counterclaim could be made that this is fine. That Professor Grimsley, you're looking at this the right way. You're exploring this without bias and so on. But it could also be, Professor Grimsley, you're being pretty slick and and getting the liberal viewpoint across while pretending to be fair and balanced, so forth. But anyway, regardless of how you look at all of this, this is something that as a historian and a history teacher, I think is one of the most valuable lessons, if you will, that I can offer you, something that you can carry with you long after you leave the university.